welcome to Paddy's vlog number 2. I'm joined today with Brian Horsburgh. I'll get Brian to introduce himself in a minute. As I spoke in the introduction, and you've probably seen with Ed's chat, this is really just an idea to get a bit more casual, ask some questions about Brian, his thoughts on the year and the way moving forward. It will last around 10-15 minutes, same as last time, so let's kick off. Brian, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Just to make sure that this isn't pre-planned, you knew nothing about this.
No worry whatsoever. That's fine.
Monday morning, 9:05, and I caught you. So thanks very much for giving me the time.
No worry.
Obviously, most people, Brian, will know you, but as I walk around the floor, I see a lot of new faces as well. That I don't know who they are, so I'm guessing some of them might not know you as well. Just very briefly, who you are, what you do, and we'll go for that.
So who am I? Yeah, that's a good question. Brian Horsburgh, I look after the HSE GM-ship and the Europe Africa region. I'll be handing over the HSE GM-ship on the 1st of January. What does that comprise? HSE is HSE Governance and Assurance, so Paddy's part of that team. Maritime Partners and Safety Programme, Elizabeth Salter looks after that. And the Oil Spill Expertise Centre, which the team sit in the Far East and here. And the Europe Africa region are the Europe Africa region, vetting and operations.
Cool, excellent, thanks very much. So as you mentioned, you're moving out of the GM ship for HSE and into the other one. So I was thinking last night where I want the conversation to go. I'm kind of hoping to focus on safety refresh, but I'm really keen to think about, so we look at Todd Compton's 5 principles, learning is vital. Looking back on your GM ship for the HSE, what things are you proud of? What things do you think that you've done well? And then after that, what things would you learn from that you might have done slightly different? So 2 questions in one, but we'll kick off with what you're most proud of.
Well, I was just thinking back, it's 10 years, so 2012, middle of 2012 I went into the role. And there was certainly, I was thinking about uncertainty then because I'd come from upstream TA1, so Bert Sphere's role, I'd done that for 3 years. And then this new role was brand new established, we didn't have it before. And I was asked to kind of, if you like, set it up. And the 3 parts I mentioned before were very much kind of in different areas. So the HSE piece, pure HSE, it's pretty straightforward. I think most folk know, understand the principles. But one of the key areas was the interface with the TSLT, the Training Supply Distribution. And at the time, back in 2012, supply and distribution wasn't part of TS.
Okay.
So I was looking after shipping and trading. And there was a big piece that I didn't know anything about, which was trucking in the States. And I had to learn that pretty damn quick and realised how big a gap there was in terms of risk management. So that was quite an interesting piece to kind of get my head around. The other bit was the Oil Spill Expertise Centre, which didn't have, it just really started. John Barton had picked it up with George Franklin and Ursula Dockery, but they hadn't really set out any kind of way forward structure and so on. So I sat down and thought about what is that going to look like and how is it going to work, and we went from 2 people to about 15 people. And that was a very big kind of start, and that was within a year, and at the same time getting a head around how big is the problem by auditing 30 businesses in that time. And then Partners and Safety, again, we only just kind of kicked that off kind of in that same year, 2012. And we'd had, I think, 3 conferences, or 3 conferences were planned, but really we hadn't really set out what was that going to look like. So over the space of a year and more, working with Ed, we kind of looked at it and said, well, what is this going to, what's the pace and how are we going to do that? So lots of big changes coming. Things that I'm really proud of is the Oil Spill Expertise Centre, setting it up for the group and where we are now. I think that what I could have learned more is probably more the HSE space and really understanding what did we really want in the connection to the TSLT.
Okay.
And it was a bit messy, to be honest, because I was reporting to Graham was then reporting up to Mike Conway and so on. And then the Partners and Safety, I'm really proud of the Partners and Safety of where it's gone, but there's again a bit of confusion about who's in charge. Ed's in charge, but I'm looking after quite a bit of it as well. So it's a bit, these interfaces things always end up being a wee bit tricky and a bit messy. So.
It's a fair point. I mean, obviously it's a great legacy when you look at your tenure and 10 years and stuff that you've introduced, and the, I suppose, introduction of all the partners and the conversations. And you're right, you know, and so people ask me about the Partners of Safety Conference. There is a bit of disconnect between, is it you, is it Ed, who goes to it kind of thing. So thinking about that, is there a way forward?
There's always a way forward. I think, so why is it the way it is? I think partly two reasons. One was the recognition that the activity sits within HSE itself, and therefore that's where the reporting line should be. But also recognition that a lot of the interfacing through the partners is done through the Ed's team, through the stewards. And that's why there's this kind of two different elements to it. Actually, I think on balance it kind of works, because over the time, before Ed it was John Barton, and I used to challenge John a lot, and I challenge Ed a lot, right? But also, Ed, you know, Ed is really focused on other things, and so I keep an eye on how are things progressing, are we doing enough? And I then make sure that all the other GMs are aligned up with regions. So I set up the meetings, engagements, and really just make sure we're going at a pace, do the analysis from an HSE perspective. And so I think it does work, but I can see where it might create a bit of uncertainty.
So as you mentioned, you're moving on to the GM-ship for EUF. How do you think the handover will be then from yourself to the incoming GM HSE in that scope? You know, I mean, have you thought about it?
I've thought about it, and I'm thinking this is going to be quite interesting, because I mean, I've always come through shipping and maritime. I mean, my background's maritime. I mean, I've 1980 I started, so 42 years, nearly 43 years. So I come with a bit of a bias, you know, good or bad, whatever that is, right? Incoming GM's coming out in P&T Wells, so he has a bit of maritime background, but I haven't yet sat down with him and spoken to him about what does he see, what does he see the forward piece for this. So as I hand over to him, he'll have his own views, as you would expect, and he'll probably sit down and listen to what's going on and then take a view from that. He may take a completely different perspective to should the Oil Expertise Centre sit where it is, but I guess he and Carrie will talk about that. The HSE side, purely HSE, he maybe say, well, should we be doing more? Is there a maybe stronger interface with you know, TNS Ops, for example? So, and he comes from that Wells background, which is a high risk activity. So I always think the two closest businesses, well, the one closest business to shipping maritime in terms of structure is P&T Wells, because they operate you know, a fleet of drilling ships, and they are a technical function. So I think him coming in, he'll appreciate how we're set up, but then he'll bring what's worked well in his organisation to the role he's coming in with. So I expect there will be change, but I don't know what that's going to look like. But I think it will be done with a lot of good thought and learning from his own role.
It's interesting to you say it's sometimes good. Within shipping and maritime, we know there's a lot of people who've been here a long time, and maybe bring someone in from outside might bring something new that we haven't really thought about, potentially.
We did that before. I mean, when I came in GM-ship, we had a couple of GMs from P&T. One was P&T, Andrew Postma, and then we had a GM from aviation. And before that, there was GMs from manufacturing. So we kind of got away from it for a while, and then they were kind of coming back. If you look at Martin, who's come in, he's come in with you know, the experience of upstream, especially Gulf of Mexico. So he's looking at how do we get closer to the businesses in the Americas, particularly Brazil. It was given the amount of production it's doing and the effect it has to the impact it has to the group, and then the connect into the commercial side, into the ports. So he's already, and his team have signed up an agreement with Galveston and the Port of Houston. And so I think there's you know, it comes with that renewed energy, but also you know, where should he and his team put the focus, perhaps different to where we've been doing before in that region. So.
It's interesting. So as you mentioned, 10 years in the role, and we're now handing over. One of the things that an observation maybe in the last couple of months for myself is how are we keeping knowledge or retention? So we talk about retention of critical knowledge, ROC tool. Have you thought about what process you're going to follow in the handover when you're handing over the new GM?
So I did suggest to Carrie, you know, do we want to do a ROC, and we haven't really followed up on that. But I think part of the reasoning, or certainly part of the reasoning for handing over the HSE GM-ship primarily in doing it now was that I'll still be around for the next 9 months.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there's a difference between. I always think the rock tool is great if you want to keep the same knowledge and the same piece, right?
Right, okay.
If you're kind of trying to find a new way of doing things, then you've got to be careful that it doesn't tie you back.
Okay.
So I think the way we'll start off is it'll be I'll call it a natural handover, whatever that means.
Right.
And then that will allow Demetrius to find his way and start looking at what does that mean. There's lots of things coming up in Q1, including the Partners and Safety Conference, right? We've also got the annual team meeting coming up. And so, you know, by the time we get to those areas, I'm sure he'll have already had a good idea of what he wants to do. And then, if indeed there is if he feels there's a need to have some kind of structured process like Rock, then we can decide to do that. So I would say there's no present need to do it now, but it may come in a couple of months. So I don't mind either way.
So we've been fortunate, as Brian alluded to there, he's going to be around for another 9 months, although he's moving to a new GM ship. You are retiring in 9 months,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
well done. You know,
And
so,
I've been doing that GM ship for a year as well, so,
Yeah.
so I'm going into it with an open eye.
yeah. So thinking about your new roles, you say you've been doing it for a year anyway. Always difficult going into a new team as Demetrius, our new GM for HSE, will see when he comes in as well, new challenges. Thinking about learning, again, the third common principles, has there been, you're kind of speculating what Demetrius is going to bring to this. What have you brought to EUF?
Well, one of the things I certainly, and again, spent the first month, that was December into January, listening and finding out what the team does and how they connect and the strong bonds. And I realised that whilst the very technical knowledge, very connected to each other, I also realised that there was quite a number of, I'll call them structured processes that were not as structured as I'm used to.
Okay.
And so I tried to bring those in, not from this is what we're going to do, it was more, here's what I'm using elsewhere, why don't we try and see what works, right? And one of these was like the weekly meeting I had with OSEC, and because over a month we have different agenda items, right?
Right.
So we started to introduce that, and although the team had a weekly catch up, it was very much just going from one to the other. And so I wanted to introduce a structure, like things like if we've got a management change process, we review that once a month.
Okay.
Have we got a buddy system came up? So do we talk about people? You know, every week, what's happening? Who's the buddy? Blah, blah, blah. And so that I kicked in. Then we didn't have, and I realised we were short by about 20% of staff were short, and hadn't got a structure to really track that, like a succession plan.
Okay.
So we covered the succession plan. Didn't get that done until September, but that was, and things before that I put in place to get us on a road to the structural element. And then even every 6 months the team has a workshop, a collective workshop. And so the first workshop we did back in June, and I missed it because of COVID, but anyway, but the idea was to take them away from the office to make them, if you like, force them to bond in a social environment, to really understand each other. And we're doing the next one at the end of January, again, off-site for a couple of days, again, to just reinforce that bonding. So just really trying to help the team get to know each other more deeply at a personal level. And
Okay.
some of them do, some of them don't. There's been quite a few people come in this year from outside external hires, and also from different parts of the business. And also, I really wanted to introduce a lot more diversity in the team. You know, probably fair to say that, and if they were sitting in front of me, they would say, yeah, we're all Dutch and we're all kind of men, you know. And so, apart from Ayan, who's in Turkey, and Rakesh, who's in South Africa. And so I've introduced more females into the team, and so that gives a different perspective.
Different balance, yeah.
And actually, I said to the team right back in February this year, I said, this is what I'm going to push for. It's going to be the best people get the role, but I'm going to make sure there's at least a female in the, if we can, in the interview.
Right, okay.
Got through to interview. And so I said, and you're going to have to change the way you think and the way you speak and the way you act in front of each other.
Yeah.
And that seems to have gone down quite well.
So a couple of things that I heard where when you first went in, you listened. So can you expand a bit more on the importance of listening?
Yeah, you know, there's always this saying, sometimes when you go in a new role at a senior level, you get a mandate, I want you to do this, right?
Yeah.
Which is all good and fine, but you can jump in and go, right, I'm just going to do it because, you know, it's broken, so I need to fix it. But most teams want to understand how do they work together? What's the level of communication and connectivity? How do they support each other? Where's the priorities? It took me a wee while to work out which were the priorities that I needed to be involved in, because having to split my time between two GM ships was very difficult. And there were two kind of areas that I could see starting to really become important. One was around the introduction of brand new barges. So trading were bringing in 40 new barges, one coming every month, and they were gas powered, and they hadn't really used those in the sector before. And the other one was degassing. So again, Netherlands government introduced in the barging area, if you change from one grade to another, you just can't vent the atmosphere if it's got a degree of toxicity. That's all going to be controlled, but there's no legislation yet. And so there's a lot of push from the government, but all the industry folk were saying, well, tell us what you want.
There's no guidance, clear guidance.
So that's been developing over the year, and I've had to keep kind of involved, but the people that work in the team have been fantastic, and I'm just giving a kind of guiding hand from my own experience. So I'm not saying, this is what you should do, I'm saying, well, this is what I would think about if I were you, and does that make sense to you?
And went there and go and get the solution. Okay. And you've introduced things and there's been change. How do you measure that change then to see if the success?
Yeah, how do you measure change like that? One of it, I would say, is around behaviour. So, what do I hear and what do I see differently when I'm around the team in the office? I think there's a change, but you have to ask them, do they see the same thing? But for me, I see the more interaction, more relaxed around each other, which is a great feeling. But also, they come and ask me questions. This is what I have in mind, what do you think? And often we'll just go into a room and, well, here's some things to think about, and I'll draw them up on a whiteboard and say, well, does that make sense to you? And they'll go, yeah, okay. And they'll go away and do some work. One of the biggest mistakes I made when you were asking me back in my start of my GM ship was two things. One, I would ask them, people do certain things, can you have a look at that? Right? And I was neither clear on what I was asking them to do, nor the timeline for that, right? And what I've learned over the years is be very clear on what I'm asking and when. So for example, if I say to someone, look, I have no idea what this was going to look like, just give me a 60-40 look, maybe in a couple of weeks. Okay. Or give me 5 bullet points, that's all I need. Don't go creating world hunger in a 50-page dossier or something, right? And I think that helps them, it helps me. And the other thing I do is, just to remind myself, because my memory's terrible, you know that. I often put a little a reminder in my diary when I'm saying it 2 weeks' time, check in with Paddy or check in with Perry or check in with on that, because otherwise I'll forget. Yeah,
and I have seen that. So for myself as well, I've seen your clarity on when you ask something, it provides a much clearer picture for me to deliver for you. So it's been really good. I did say it would take 20 minutes, which is amazing how quick 20 minutes probably goes. So is there any parting shot that you'd like to leave, if we have got any viewers, any of our viewers, about, I suppose, safety in general? I mean, what can we do as an individual, as a business, as an organisation to change direction of safety and get to our goals here?
I mean, the human performance is the biggest thing. If you concentrate on one thing, and I think this whole piece around, the 5 human performance principles, they're not mature enough yet, but we're getting the maturity in it. But with that is this philosophy of failing safely, and as an industry, in the maritime field, we have lots of traditions that we don't even realise that we have, that we need to start thinking differently. So even when you think about failing safely, everybody will agree, fail safe, but yet we go up and down pilot ladders, we go up and down cargo tanks without any restraints. So there's a few things we do that we would do because we've always done them that way. Okay. And so we have to break that fixed thinking, and look at it with a different set of eyes. And I still remember, I think it was 2019, we introduced into the Partners in Safety Conference a simple thing which was observe differently. Where you literally stand and just look for about 12 to 15 minutes. And you don't move, you don't ask questions, you just watch what's going on. And it's amazing what you can see in that time. And that will help realise that things are going on that you would not normally see, that you need to be aware of.
Excellent. Brian, thank you very much.
More than well.
Thank you. Thanks, folks.